Well, hello, it's Andrew yet again, and today we're at episode 157, and we're continuing Jesus challenging the religious leaders, the chief priests and the scribes, about their challenging of him, about what gives him the right to do what he's doing in the temple. This is after he has made the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. He has cleansed the temple, and the next day he's come back to the temple. So we pick the narrative up in Matthew chapter 21, verses 33 through to 46. Listen to another parable. There was a landowner who planted a vineyard, put a fence around it, dug a wine press in it, and built a watchtower. Then he leased it to tenants and went to another country. When the harvest time had come, he sent his slaves to the tenants to collect his produce. But the tenants seized the slaves and beat one, killed another, and stoned another. Again he sent other slaves, more than the first, and they treated them in the same way. Finally he sent his son to them, saying, "They will respect my son." But when the tenants saw the son, they said to themselves, "This is the heir. Come, let's kill him and get his inheritance." So they seized him, threw him out of the vineyard, and killed him. Now when the owner of the vineyard comes, what will he do to those tenants? They said to him, "He will put those wretches to a miserable death, and lease the vineyard to other tenants who will give him the produce at the harvest time." Now, as I said, Jesus is still pushing back against the temple authorities, the chief priests and the scribes, who are questioning his authority to cleanse the temple of its merchants, to heal, and to take up space in the temple courts to do teaching. And he's just told the parable of the two sons, and he moves on to the second parable. He's addressing them in particular, the religious leaders. There is one more to come, and we'll look at this in a couple of episodes from now. In this instant, though, he tells them that he's telling them a parable. I find that really interesting. In Matthew's Gospel, he's not done this before. And this should be a clue to them, and a warning, that something that may be uncomfortable for them could be coming down the pipe. Apparently, they don't see what's coming. Not immediately. It's only with a little bit of commentary that Jesus subsequently provides, which we will talk about in our next episode, that they get it. So, parables. What are they for? Now, I've already talked about this in a previous episode, but it's not doing any harm to recover some of the ground. The purpose of parables, I always used to think, was to make things secret, to make things obscure. But I no longer believe that. I believe the purpose of parables is to open things up, is to open up the meaning, to present a picture so that people can see what it is the issues are, but see it in a different way. One of the advantages of parables is it also avoids direct confrontation. Jesus doesn't have to make any propositional statements about them that they can argue about or fight back against. The parables have a way of interpreting themselves. The reality is that we all live in stories. We live in a story, and we can't help but identify with certain characters when we read a story. And it's who we identify with that is of interest. Years ago there was a movement that was surrounded with a thing called liberation theology. It was started by, I think it was a Catholic priest, Gustavo Gutierrez in South America. And it was always looking about the way that oppressed people were disadvantaged. It was good news for the oppressed. And he did Bible studies. I remember reading some stuff about what he'd found with the parable of the Good Samaritan. And he said that in the West, people generally in that parable identify themselves with one of three characters, as either the priest or the Levite or the Good Samaritan. That's what who we tend to identify ourselves with. But for The people who were at the bottom of the pile, the people who were oppressed, they identified with the man who'd been beaten up and robbed and was left for dead, which is kind of quite shocking to the rest of us, because they think, oh. But for them, that was their experience. That was their reality. So parables act both as a window and as a mirror. One of the reasons I enjoy science fiction, particularly things like Star Trek. I used to love The Next Generation because the episodes were really quite interesting in that they allow us to look at contemporary issues removed from our cultural context, our time and place, and consider them without all the emotional baggage that might otherwise come with them. You may not get that, but that's how it is for me. But parables also act as a mirror in reflecting us back to ourselves. As I said, we often can't help but identify with certain characters. At this point, the parable that Jesus is offering goes straight over the top. They don't get it. They don't see at all that this could be aimed at them. They don't identify with the ones that Jesus intends them to hear. I suspect they are more in the corner of the landowner who has been cheated of what is rightfully his. They don't see themselves as the unjust interlopers, the stewards of the property who are being dishonest about the way in which they're living. At this point, I want to introduce you to something different. This is the Johari window. Here it is. I'm going to hold it up in front. I don't know if this is the best way of doing it. I haven't quite got the hang of the technology yet, though I might give it a go to see if I can put this online in the actual video itself so that you can look at it. But this is a Johari window. It has, as you can see, 4 quadrants. And it's about what is known about us. In this quadrant up here, this is the open area. This is the one where what we know about ourselves and what others know about us is in the public arena. It's plain to everybody. This one down here, underneath it, is the hidden area. This is the things about ourselves that we know, but that others don't. This is the area of facade. This is the area where we project an image that may or may not be true of us, but we put up a facade. There are certain things about us that are secret, and we want it kept that way. We don't want other people to know. So this is the hidden area. This area alongside it at the bottom is the unknown area. This is a large area often, very, very large. It's a wee bit like an iceberg. The bit above is only about 10%. What's underneath is hidden. And this is unknown to others, and it's also unknown to ourselves. This bit here is known only to God. And then there's this piece up here, which is the most interesting of all. This is the bit that is not known to us, but it's known to others. It's the blind spot. This is the things about ourselves that we don't see, but that others do. It's a wee bit like Jesus talking about seeing the speck in somebody's eye, but failing to see the log in our own. That's our log. This is the blind spot. And this is actually often the most fruitful area for some work to be done. And that's what's happening in this parable. They have a huge blind spot. They do not see themselves as the unjust stewards. They do not see themselves as the ones who are not acting faithfully. Now, just as an interesting sort of aside, it's called a Johari window because the 2 men who came up with it in 1955 were both psychologists. I think they were German, and their first names, one of them was Joseph and the other was Harrington, so they called it the Johari window, and there we have it. Interesting, isn't it? At this point, as I said, the religious leaders do not realize, they do not recognize their own blind spot. They've not seen themselves as the evil tenants. And they're outraged by them. That's really the interesting thing. They are outraged by the behaviour of the evil tenants. The owner, in their own words, this is what they say, needs to put those riches to a miserable death and lease the vineyard to others who will give them the produce at the harvest time. They don't see that this is them, but they're really angry about it. And what Jesus effectively does is he pings them in a similar way to what the Nathan the prophet does when King David fails to see himself as the evil perpetrator in a story that Nathan tells him. Nathan the prophet comes with a parable. And in the parable, there's a poor man who has a single ewe lamb, which he loves. His landlord has many sheep. But one day he has visitors come, and the landlord takes the one ewe lamb of his tenant, and he has it slaughtered and cooked up and put on the table before his guests. And David is told the story by Nathan, and David flies into a rage, and he says, "The man who does this ought to die." And Nathan responds with those powerful words, you are the man. You are the man. And then he tells them what he's done, because this is a story about something else. And David gets put on the spot. And so we see here again the rage of the religious leaders at the injustice meted out to this landlord and his family by these self-interested stewards, not realizing that it's them that the story is talking about. Sometimes our over-the-top emotional response to such stories is telling us something, that there is something in this for us. Maybe deeply embedded in our blind spot that could do with some gentle exploration. It's worth noticing the next time you get really upset about something. It might be a story, it might be something you see, it might be something you hear that happens just a bit outside. It's not necessarily about you. It might be worth taking notice that there's actually something here for you, something that you're not seeing. Jesus is also prefiguring his own rejection and death just a few short days into the future, where these religious leaders will faithfully play the part that is horrifying them at the moment as those who call for and put to death the son of the landowner. Isn't that exactly what this is about? That the landowner sends his son to call the stewards to responsible stewardship, and they're going to put him to death. I wonder how many of them thought of this as they saw Jesus hanging from the cross. Or were they so consumed with their own self-righteousness that they failed to see that what Jesus had portrayed before them was being played out in real time, and that they were the perpetrators of the great evil, just as he said they would be. I suspect that for some it might have been years before they had the insight to see what it was that they had done, if ever. We have huge capacity within us for self-deception, huge capacity to protect our psyches from unpalatable awarenesses that we might in fact be some way responsible for what's happened, and in fact it might rest with us. We all have a tendency for self-justification, particularly when the evil is great. I'd expect these men to be no different. It's also true, potentially, my friends, for you and for me. This parable is an invitation for some circumspection about how we live and how we are towards others. God bless you.